Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the keynote address at NextBreath. My name is Ashley Locke, and I am the co-chair of this event. I will be moderating the session this evening, and I'll be introducing my fellow co-chair in just a moment. Before we get started with the session, I want to go over a few items related to technology and how we can all interact. You'll notice both the event-wide chat and the main stage chat. You can utilize the main stage chat to interact with all of those who are attending this keynote. If you would like live captions during the event, please click the CC icon located at the bottom of the video feed. Please note, captions are not available if you are using a mobile app to view this event. The focus of this keynote is to give insight into the life of a person with advanced CF lung disease and how to maintain the strength to keep going in the face of challenges. Towards the end of this presentation, Ella will be answering your questions, so please submit your questions at any time by clicking the main stage chat on the right side of your screen and then selecting Q&A. We encourage you to like questions so we can prioritize the questions we answer in our limited amount of time. We will do our best to answer as many questions as possible. As a reminder, this question and answer session is not intended to be a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment recommendations. Do not make any changes to your own treatment plan without first consulting your care team. If you have any technology problems during this session, please visit the Tech and Program Support Room accessible on the left side of your screen under the Help Desk tab. Now, it's time to introduce our co-chair and keynote speaker, Ella.
Thanks, Ashley. Thanks for the introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Ella Balasa, and I am from Richmond, Virginia. I'm 31 years old, and I have been living with advanced lung disease for a majority of my adult life. I've been involved with the CF Foundation on the national level and with my local Virginia chapter as well quite a bit, and been on a number of research committees, and was excited to be a part of planning NextBreath. And I'm very close with the transplant community as well with CF. So I'm looking forward to sharing a little bit about my story with you all, and then also having that dialogue and Q&A section at the end. So my presentation is titled Losing Your Breath, Gaining Your Resilience, and Staying Empowered Through Advanced CF Journey. Go to the next slide. So I was diagnosed with CF at 18 months old. My parents said that I was just a very sickly kid. I was obviously underweight, always had upper and lower respiratory infections. And then finally the pediatrician was like, oh, there's got to be something really wrong with her once I got pneumonia at 18 months old. I'm the only one in my family that has CF. No one in even my extended family has the disease. My parents had never heard of it before I was diagnosed. And I have two older siblings. Those are in the photos there. You can see them. I had a relatively normal childhood, other than the fact that I was hospitalized, sometimes just once a year, sometimes none at all during a year, sometimes multiple times a year, to get IV antibiotics to treat the infections that have obviously become progressively worse through the years, and I'll talk more about that. But growing up, I always felt kind of different. I had to go to the nurses every day to do my breathing treatments, take enzymes, and miss time because of hospitalization. So that was always challenging growing up, and as I think many of us can relate to and have experienced. Throughout the years, I have increasingly lost the function of my lungs. I remember at 12 years old, I was hospitalized. This was in 7th grade. And that was the first time that I remember remembering the FEV1 numbers. Before that, I never really paid attention to it. I just was always terrified to do the test and, be told that I would need to go in the hospital. But I remember, looking at the numbers on the screen, and it's saying like 50, I want to say like 57% or something. So that was when I was 12. At that point, I had already lost, roughly about half of my lung capacity. And since then, it's been a very gradual decline in my health and in my overall lung capacity. I remember at I was 19 years old, and that was the first time that I was referred for transplant. So I can go to the next slide. So, being 19 years old, at that point, I'd been dealing with lung infections. I had just started college. And that was the summer of my, after my freshman year. And I was told that I would, need to be transplanted because I had at that point, like 35% FEV1 roughly. And I was terrified because I felt like I was going to die before I had ever had an opportunity to live my life. It was before I really knew. I had not heard, nobody had ever, it was just kind of sprung on me. Nobody had talked about transplant before. It was this thing that I had, heard about, but didn't think that, I was sick enough to actually have to go through that. And so that summer I went to do all the testing that's required, all those the invasive slew of tests. And, it was really a scary time for me. And I was definitely quite, just terrified and didn't know what to expect. Fast forward a little bit, I was deemed too early, so I wasn't in the window for transplant. So I was not sick enough to be transplanted at that time. But, after that, I went on to graduate college. And so I went on to graduate college and had increasing, difficulties with my lungs. I had at that point, I had experienced lung collapses. So I had to be hospitalized multiple times in my later college years, and then in 2017 as well, for lung collapses, which required pleurodesis, which is the surgery to fix the collapsed lungs. So I've gone through that now a total of 4 times. And so those were the most difficult parts, of dealing with advanced lung disease. And after I graduated, that point, I was really struggling with consistent lung infections. I was, and I still do 3 to 4 breathing treatments a day, but, with Trikafta, I have a little more flexibility in my day and a little more stability. But at the time I was, experiencing lung infections every few months. If I wasn't doing my breathing treatments every few hours, I was getting full of mucus. And so I had to be very, very regimented to that. And so after I graduated college, I wanted, to start a career like my peers and everybody else, around me. And I wanted to find my success in the world. But, I realized that I couldn't sustain full-time work. And so I ended up turning down a job offer that I had working. I got a degree in biology. And so I ended up turning down a full-time work and started working part-time in a laboratory from the university that I had graduated from. And so this was also a very difficult point in my life because I felt like, I couldn't keep up. My body, my lungs were preventing me from living a life that I wanted to live. And so I wanted to, at that point, I had been somewhat connected to the CF community and people and other people with CF, but not that closely. And so it was that around that time that I was like, I want to share, I want, support in these experiences and in these obstacles. And so I became a part of the CF Roundtable, which is they develop a newsletter for people with CF to support the community. And so I became one of the directors for that. I started writing some CF columns on like CF News Today. And so just started like introspectively sharing about life with CF. And so that was also the time when I started getting more involved with the CF Foundation as well, kind of bridging my science background, my science understanding, and giving my input on a couple of different committees where, I was, determining, what's important for research, like what's important for the CF community to, have a focus on in advancing care and in research. And so that was what kind of kick-started my interest in patient advocacy, which is majority of what I do now. But I'll get to that in a minute. But fast forward a little bit to 2019, and that was the point that I was the most sickest in my health overall. I had a really bad exacerbation. And and at that point, I had already been on intravenous antibiotics multiple times a year. And I was, minimally working in a lab at that point. And my FEV1 dipped to 18%. And a few months prior to that, also, you can go to the next slide. A few months prior to that, I had been involved with the, as I said, I was like sharing my health experiences online, and I've been contacted by a company that asked me to write about what living with CF was like to accompany this documentary that they created. And it was a documentary about what living with, CF is like, but they were recording a video of somebody that was treated with phage therapy. And phage therapy is it's use of a very specific virus to attack bacterial hosts. And so I, having experienced a lot of lung infections, antibiotics not working, I wanted to, try this and have that as an option for me. So you can go to the next slide as well. So I ended up being able to, I reached out directly to researchers at Yale. I mean, I felt comfortable doing that because, I had been working in a lab, I've been, doing research, reading research papers. And so I felt that, that whole self-advocacy component where, I felt comfortable in determining whether this was something that I think would be, beneficial to my health or something that I would be willing to try. And so I traveled up to Yale, I received this treatment, and it was helpful in clearing that infection that I had. And so long story short, my lungs were still very weak after that infection. And so I was referred to transplant a second time. But so to talk about phage a little bit more, if you're interested in learning more about what it is, I did an interview right after that experience. And that's on the CF community blog with the interview about phage. So you can learn more about what that is. And then I also published my experience in the HuffPost, and that's the other article there where you can see on the page. And I started, I inhaled this treatment for a week. And now it's, increasingly becoming more prevalent, and there is some funding from the CF Foundation, a number of other, research organizations and companies are putting money towards phage therapy research. It's both, inhaling it and using it intravenously too, as an alternative to traditional antibiotics. And so, this experience really just cemented my interest in wanting to share more broadly on the value that, we as people living with conditions, whether that's CF or anything else, to take on like to try to improve our health as in any way that we can. And so I was very fortunate, to be able to have this situation and have this present itself and me being able to try it. But, it's not afforded to many people. And so the more that we can possibly have these opportunities, to improve our health and whatever that looks like, I think that's really important. So I can go to the next slide first. And so, having dealt with these severe lung infections for many, many years, and then phage therapy being something that I just found happenstance, I really realized how much lacking infection research and therapies there are. We really just have, traditional antibiotics, which don't work for many people that have antimicrobial resistant infections. Many people with advanced lung disease do in CF. And so I started becoming more outspoken about this. So after the HuffPost article, I was asked to speak on a number of panels, give presentations, keynotes, really on the need for research and novel mechanisms for combating AMR infections. And so these are just a couple of examples of some of the patient stories and features and documentaries that I have been a part of. So it's something that's really important to me as part of what the advocacy work that I do now, and hopeful in having increasingly novel ways of combating these infections despite us living with advanced lung disease. And you can go to the next slide. So as I mentioned before, after this phage experience, my lungs did, although I cleared the infection, my lungs did remain very weak. And so shortly thereafter, I was then referred again to transplant. This time I moved down from Richmond, Virginia. I moved down to Duke University in North Carolina to prepare for getting a lung transplant. And so I moved down there, I got an apartment. My mom was my caregiver. She moved with me. And I was a part of their rehab program, lung transplant rehab program. So that entailed a month. It was like a month-long thing where every day, like Monday through Friday, it would be like two or 3 hours of exercise, using oxygen, of course. Everybody needed oxygen in the facility. And it was then another hour or two of learning, really just like educational courses on learning about what, transplant entails and what life after transplant would be like. And they talked about, the surgery itself, and then later on, what happens after the medications, all of that. And so I also wrote another article on the CFF blog about what I learned in the process of preparing for the lung transplant and what that was like. But soon after, so this was in the summer of 2019, but very soon after that, I learned that I could get expanded access to Trikafta. And so I wanted to hold off on being listed until I got to try Trikafta and see that if it would help and stabilize me. And it did. I did experience some mild improvement. My FEV1 went up to like 28%, which is kind of where I'm at currently still. But it's helped to reduce the severity and the frequency of the exacerbations that I have had. And so that's been, really great in helping my quality of life day to day. I do still use supplemental oxygen when I am sleeping and when I am exercising, using up to about like 3 to 4 liters of oxygen. And, before I started Trikafta, I don't want to get my hopes up too high. I was fully prepared to get listed and get a transplant that year. I knew that I had fought enough with the crappy lungs that I have, that, I was ready to take that step prior, if Trikafta hadn't done anything. But, with the mild improvement that I experienced, I really, like I said, I haven't had to use intravenous antibiotics since that point, which has been, a tremendous difference. Really, that's probably been the biggest change. And then, day to day, just not experiencing so much of the mucus accumulation. So, I think that as people with advanced lung disease, we see a lot of the people that have had so much improvement in their health, and it can be a little frustrating, certainly. I'm like, well, yeah, Trikafta is great, but it's not a miracle. It's not like changing my life. But if I really think about it, it's given me an additional 3 years without getting a transplant. Although I fight every day to, I haven't stopped doing my breathing treatments. I, still do all the, albuterol, pulmazine, all of that. And I still have to do it, and be religious about it and make sure that I'm like maintaining my health. But, it's made it a little bit easier on me, which is, something I am tremendously grateful for. And so I also wrote about the experience of, what being on before starting Trikafta, and then what the experience of having been on Trikafta was like around this time that I was still, part of this rehab program and kind of phasing out of that. And I ended up not getting a transplant. And then I moved back to Richmond a few months, 2 or 3 months after starting Trikafta that fall. So this is, hopefully these links are being put in the comments section for all these articles that I'm mentioning. But if not, I can certainly add them in after we do the Q&A section. So yeah, that was something that I wrote in the Washington Post, I think the Lilly article. And so that just describes more of, my mental thoughts on, not getting my hopes too high. And then what the actual, what the Trikafta had brought as far as changes in my day-to-day health. And then go to the next slide. So, I'll talk a little bit about where I am now. As I said, I'm still using supplemental oxygen. When I'm flying too, that's not changed. Obviously in altitude, you're saturated. The oxygen molecules are further apart. There's less of it. And so, I still have to use oxygen when I'm flying, and longer distance flights are still difficult on my body, and I don't do them as often. And also because I've had the lung collapses. So it's something that is a little bit nerve-wracking for me. So last year though, I was actually went to the Grand Canyon. And so that's the photo on this slide there, which is awesome. And that's me and my mom in the photo on the left side there, in the helicopter ride that we took to the Grand Canyon from Las Vegas. And, it looks, we know that like CF is a invisible disease, and although it looks like I am very healthy, I am dealing with less than 30% lung function. And, the photos of course can be deceiving of everybody's life. And, the one there with my mom in the photo, my hand, you can see it's going like this because I had an oxygen cannula on, in the helicopter, but I took it off for the photo. So I just pulled it down here on my neck. So, that just kind of paints a little perspective on, life. It's not, it's always, you never know like what somebody's experiencing and going through. And though we might, as people living with advanced lung disease, it might seem like there's nothing wrong with us. And oftentimes I think it's hard for people to really understand, what our day-to-day life may look like and how challenging it is for us to do what other people do, day to day, every day, and don't even think about it. And it certainly is frustrating to, be limited physically as far as, I can't do any strenuous sports. recreational activities like skiing or, wakeboarding, like any sort of like mountain, like hiking, obviously with altitude, I do, because I'm using oxygen, and the small portable container, the small portable oxygens only go up to like, 2 liters on a constant flow, but that's just not enough for me to hike up a mountain. And so, and also if I'm carrying something like this on my back, that's energy expended too. So it kind of like negates any benefit that the oxygen would have. So there's obviously a lot of activities that at this point in my life I cannot do. But, just taking it a day at a time, doing what I can. I am, as I mentioned before, I'm doing more involved in patient advocacy and patient engagement. So working with, and I work remote now. So just able to do everything from my computer and have the flexibility of doing treatments when I need to. And, taking time to recover when I need that too. And, I'm working with like pharmaceutical companies, helping to bring the patient voice and the patient perspective into their initiatives and into their clinical trials, and like patient-facing materials, making sure it's all that patient centricity is the center of the healthcare overall. So that's kind of sums it up. The photo there on the top left, that's, some of you may have seen that. It was a long drawing that I did a couple of years ago, that was used on like some CF bags and t-shirts and things like that. But I just kind of threw it in there because it's something that's obviously relevant to everybody here. And just, it symbolizes a lot for me, is, having lungs that are stricken with disease and illness, but, the roses are still blooming in our lives, and, provide us that momentum to keep pushing forward every day, and, have that positive attitude, and just be hopeful and open to whatever life brings each day. So, yeah, I will end there, and looks like there's lots of questions. Ashley, I think you're muted.
I am muted. Yeah, we have a few questions here for you in the comments. Rachel says, thank you for sharing your story. What advice would you give to someone wanting to begin a career in patient advocacy?
So I would say it first begins with the way that it started for me is just sharing my personal experiences. As I said, like, I started doing some writing, sharing introspectively about what my life is like. And then from there, I was asked to like be featured with a couple of, other nonprofits, some projects within the CF Foundation as too. And that's where I started like have a more, like be a professional patient, you could say, and be on a couple of these committees together with, physicians, with CFF staff, with researchers, now with the pharmaceutical industry. So it starts with just kind of, sharing your story, but then also kind of weaving in themes that are relevant to other people with illness, that other people, obstacles and gaps and issues that lots of people experience, that you can kind of guide, industry or, the healthcare system overall to understand what these issues are and help them come up with the solutions for it. So that's how you can, be an advocate, not just for yourself, but for people more broadly, living with CF or, other chronic conditions or rare disease or whatnot. So I think it's a process. I mean, it's taken me a couple of years to, do what I do at this point. But, I think it requires that like passion for, first for empowering other people to, have better ownership and just like to have better health outcomes, because you want everybody to obviously have the best healthcare and life that they can. So it's providing that motivation for others and kind of like being that voice. And then, wanting to, and then also requires, you to not be afraid of just, sharing what you think. If that might not be the, what everybody wants to hear, but that's what, if it's a issue or something that's really important to you and something that's a problem, you need to raise that and you need to talk about it. And, it's important. If it's important to you, it's certainly important to other people out there too. So those are a couple of things that I'd suggest.
I very much agree. Okay, we have another question that says, how do you find a balance with advanced lung disease and the desire to still work? I think that we touched on this a bit as well.
Yeah. Honestly, still working and finding like things that fulfill me. It was almost like I don't want to say like a distraction from, the difficulty of dealing with the disease every day and like the struggle of, not feeling well as soon as I wake up. So it helps me to stay motivated and focused on something other than just my health. And though that might seem like, and sometimes it is too much, and sometimes it is a lot to balance everything, I think it helps to provide that, that focus on something more bigger than just your own health and kind of getting bogged down in that, and it allows you to, kind of open your mind to, not having to think about it all the time. Because I think when you don't have as much going on, like that's what I get, like I stress out more and I like think, I dwell on things, right? So it helps to naturally keep that balance of maintaining your care, putting the effort into that, but then also not dwelling on things and finding that motivation and that fulfillment.
I agree. Okay, let me see. We've got a few more here from the chat. Was it scary to inhale a new treatment, especially viruses? What were your initial thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely scary. And I definitely in that article from the HuffPost, I really talk about what the mental like difficulty of that was, is because actually I didn't share about this before, but I had asked so when I found out about it, I had asked my CF doctor and he was like, well, I don't know anything about phage. Like there's no research on this. I mean, it's an experimental treatment. It's not FDA approved. And so I, had to research, gain the knowledge for myself based on talking with researchers at Yale, based on what I had found out, for myself and the research that I had done to make that determination of whether this was something that I wanted to risk doing. And so it was definitely very scary, especially because I, at that point, had like as I said, 18% FEV1. So I was like, I mean, frankly, to put it, teetering on the edge of death. And I certainly was afraid that, okay, I'm going to try this and it's going to go south really quickly. I am not, at that point, I had been in touch with the transplant center, but I was not being worked up for transplant. They knew about what was going on, but I don't think they even really knew the severity of, what I was going through. And so, so what if I, get this treatment, it goes really bad. I'm up at Yale, my transplant center is in North Carolina. Is there going to be enough time? Like, am I going to do something that's really going to mess up and, not allow me that window of time to then get a transplant if I really would have needed it. So it was a really difficult decision to make. But that's the route I chose.
And I can definitely relate to that, being in a last ditch effort, as you said during your keynote, that you get to that point and it's just like you got to do what you got to do, like try to help them figure it out. Okay, someone else says, can you talk more about your work with pharmaceutical companies?
Yeah, so I do patient engagement consulting. So I am asked to sometimes review materials that are patient facing some CF specific, sometimes more rare disease, sometimes much more broadly, and make sure that it's addressing or speaking to the population that it's intended for. Sometimes I review like clinical trial protocols. This has been mostly within CF, making sure that the requirements for the tests that are being asked to do of a patient in a trial is feasible. Sometimes, we all know that like when we have to do like a slew of tests and, have to be in a clinic for multiple hours, I mean, that's strenuous and it's painstaking and it's not feasible for people to participate in. And so I provide awareness for companies in this regard. And then I attend conferences and give presentations as well, talking about the need for companies to bring patients into conversations when they're developing the clinical trials earlier, when they are developing initiatives or, trying to build a reputation or a relationship with certain patient populations, and, why like patient advisory boards are important. Like I sit on a number of these advisory boards with companies as well. So just giving a lot of that patient input and that patient feedback.
I think that's a great answer. Okay, we've got another one that says, Ella, thank you for courageously sharing your story. If you could change the healthcare system or some aspect of healthcare to better meet the needs of CF patients, what would you do?
Yeah, if I could change the healthcare system.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, there's lots of things.
Yeah, that's a loaded question.
We could really get deep in this one. So, I think, well, for one, not to go down too much on the road, but like accessibility to, the difficulty for patients or people that have, when we're having to do like medication refills and prior authorizations, trying to get our medications, trying to, get new prescriptions, like it's so, and then navigating that, like, wait, who am I supposed to call now? Like, when there's an insurance change, like all of the, like, it's so burdensome on people. And so I think that's like day to day, that's what I think so many people with CF, with other conditions do struggle with, and have to spend so much time doing. And then, so it's a lot of this administrative burden that isn't even having, it's time taken away from our work, our responsibilities, our family, our lives, our health, that we're having to coordinate and do all this that, frankly, is probably the responsibility of somebody working in an administrative role somewhere across the healthcare system. But many things fall through the cracks. So, I'd say that that's probably the biggest thing that I would change. Of course, there's many players involved in all of this, and that's it's a big conversation. But I'm sure everybody listening can relate to this in some way.
100%. Okay, and then someone asked, what do you look forward to most if or when you get a transplant?
I think about this and I get asked this. Definitely doing like adventurous things. Like I want to ski. I want to, like wakeboard, like do a lot of like water sports, swim more. Like swimming is very, very strenuous. And I'm not a great swimmer by any means, but it's something I want to do more of. Even like snorkeling. Like I have snorkeled in the past, but it's difficult to do. So yeah, things like that, just like hiking too. I want to definitely do more hiking. So just like strenuous physical activities, or like I want to run, like not that I necessarily think will be a runner, as far as like marathons or things like that, but I just want to be able to.
Yeah.
So I think it's like, those are the things that I cannot do right now. And so I think that's what I want to do most.
I think that was my main motivation post-transplant as well, is just wanting to get back out in the woods, be able to walk for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so here's a question about your rehab experience. How long were you in pulmonary rehab, and was it difficult to do with the decreased lung function? Even though they say that exercise is important, it's difficult if your FEV is so low.
Yes, absolutely. It's very difficult. It still is very difficult when I'm exercising, and it's very frustrating because I know that my body can do more. My muscles are strong, like my body is strong, but my lungs are what hold me back. And the fact that they cannot exchange, do the oxygen exchange effectively to fuel my muscles. And so it's so to answer the question, uh, I was in rehab for about a month or month and a half. I did stay in it a little bit longer while I was in the process of waiting for Trikafta and then starting Trikafta. So I did it, but I wasn't actively listed. And yeah, I mean these transplant programs really do push. Like there were people there that I saw who were very, very seriously struggling with keeping up with the exercise regimens, and they were not, they're like, okay, no, you can try another day. No, they stayed there, and they maybe have to sit for a few extra minutes, or an hour or so, but they were asked to do the exercise as is required. And so it is very difficult. Just I think people cannot, unless you've experienced it, cannot fathom the degree to which the like the shortness of breath, and how it really is like feeling, like breathing through a straw, right? Like you're trying to get so much air into your lungs that physically the air is going in, but also not really, because the lungs cannot just take in that much air. And so yeah, it's challenging and it's tiring, but at the same time, it builds your endurance, although it's very gradual and barely noticeable. I did experience some improvement in my overall capacity to walk and do a little bit more and feel less out of breath. So in that regard, it pays off. But those very, very gradual incremental improvements are hard to get and often don't happen, because then you have the setbacks of exacerbations, or feeling not so great for a couple of days. So yeah, it's a challenge.
Yes, I definitely do agree because as we mentioned before, I also did pulmonary rehab for a stint, and it's very difficult when you know that your mind and your body is capable of more, but your lungs aren't supplying your muscles with the oxygen it needs to keep going and do that exercise. It's very frustrating. Um, what are some of your favorite outlets for your mental health to kind of keep that in check?
I would say that kind of, what I talked about a little bit before was about like the work, the motivation to be, the patient advocate, and do the roles that I have with my work. I mean, it's very, there's a lot of personal ties to that. And so that really helps me to stay motivated, stay focused, like, not allows me to dwell on things as much, and to, have like I guess that like self-pity, and, like the why me and the woe me. Certainly it can be challenging, especially now that I have less of the exacerbations, but when I have had lung collapses, in the last year or two, and even since I had those surgeries a couple years ago. And when that happens, it's definitely like a very much a reality check. It's like, wow, like my health is very much teetering on the edge. Like I can very quickly just fall off, and something really bad can happen, and I might move me to transplant immediately. So really try not to focus on that. I try not to let the what ifs control my life and to control my mind and my thoughts. I'm very much like, okay, I'm going to take it one step at a time. I'm going to do today. I'm going to get through today, and then I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. No idea. There's been times where, I've had travel plans to, fly in a plane, but I have a lung collapse. So there's no way that's going to happen. But I'm literally, playing it day by day, to determine, okay, maybe my lung will improve in the next week and then I can take the flight, or maybe, I'm going to have to take a different method of transportation, or maybe I'm not going to be able to go at all, and so this uncertainty can be very difficult. But the only way that I can control it is by saying, there are some things that I have no control over. And the things that I have no control over, I cannot worry about, and it's much easier said than in practice. But, it's definitely the way that I've, just really try to go on and just, have that hope and that like momentum and that, looking forward to the future, whatever that is.
I think that is an excellent answer, and I appreciate all of your time answering these questions and everyone that participated in asking. We are about out of time, though, so I would like to wrap up. Thank you, Ella, for sharing your experiences and insights, and thanks to all of you for your attention and your questions. We hope you will stick around for the small group discussion, panel discussion, and one-on-one networking beginning in 5 minutes. Stay here in the main page area to view the panel discussion and move to the sessions area to take part in the small group discussion. Thanks again for joining today's Day 1 keynote.
Thank you.
Thank you.